My life in Cascade Creek had settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. I'd bought the old bookstore, the dusty page, with the last of my inheritance, chasing a fantasy of small-town charm and peaceful solitude. What I found was just solitude. The charm was there, I supposed, in the quaint storefronts and the chattering gossip at the general store, but it was a charm I observed from behind glass. I was the quiet man from the city who ran the bookshop, a curiosity that had long since worn off, leaving me to my orderly shelves and the company of fictional characters. My days were measured in the scent of aging paper and brewing tea, my nights in the oppressive silence of my small apartment above the shop. I was lonely, a deep, foundational loneliness that had become so familiar it felt like a part of my own skeleton. And then there was Sheriff Holt. He was as much a fixture of the town as the granite peak that loomed over it. I'd see his cruiser parked by the diner in the mornings, a solid, reassuring presence. I'd watch him talk to Mrs. Gable about her prize-winning roses, his head inclined with a patience that seemed boundless. He moved with a deliberate economy, no wasted gestures, no hurried steps. He was tall, broad in a way that spoke of solid strength rather than gym-sculpted vanity. His uniform always seemed perfectly pressed, his jaw perpetually shadowed with dark stubble, his eyes a steady, unreadable gray. He was a man carved from the same rugged landscape he patrolled, and for 2 years, my fascination with him had been my most guarded secret. It was a silent, hopeless ache, a one-sided conversation held in the privacy of my own head whenever he came into view. I was an observer of my own life, and he was the most compelling thing to observe. The inciting incident, the tremor that would eventually shake my entire world off its foundations, wasn't dramatic. It was mundane. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the air crisp with the threat of the first real frost. I'd closed the shop late, wrestling with a new shipment of inventory, and my old pickup truck, a machine held together by rust and stubbornness, chose that moment to finally give up the ghost. I was on the old logging road that cut behind the town, a shortcut I sometimes took home. The engine sputtered, coughed a plume of greasy smoke, and died. Just like that, I was plunged into a profound silence, broken only by the frantic ticking of the cooling engine. No streetlights, no houses, just the dense, black wall of pine trees and a sliver of moon. My phone, predictably, had no signal. I sat there for a long time, a wave of pathetic helplessness washing over me. This was it. This was my life. Stranded, alone, invisible. I was contemplating the long, dark walk back to town when the world behind me was split open by a blinding white light. Headlights. They pinned my truck in their glare, and I saw the distinct, unmistakable shape of the light bar on the roof. A patrol car. My heart gave a stupid, panicked lurch. Of all the people to find me in this state of mild peril. Gravel crunched as the cruiser pulled up slowly behind me. The engine cut, and for a moment, we just sat there, 2 vehicles suspended in the darkness. Then a door opened and closed with a solid, definitive thud. In my rearview mirror, a silhouette emerged, broad and tall, and began to walk toward me. I knew that walk. I knew the set of those shoulders. Sheriff Holt. My stomach twisted into a knot of anxiety and something else, something warm and foolishly hopeful. He stopped beside my driver's side door, his form casting a long shadow in the headlights. I rolled down the window, the crank groaning in protest. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth, and something else, the faint, clean smell of his soap and the leather of his duty belt. It was grounding. Trouble. His voice was just as I'd imagined it up close. A low, calm rumble. Not quite a drawl, but unhurried. It, seems to have died, I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I gestured vaguely at the dashboard. Just stopped. He leaned down slightly, resting a hand on the roof of my truck. The gesture was casual, but the proximity of his arm, the sheer solidness of him so close, made the air in the cab feel thick and hard to breathe. His gray eyes scanned the interior, lingering on me for a second longer than was strictly necessary. It was a look I couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity or annoyance. It was just steady, observing. "Pop the hood," he said. It wasn't a question. I did, fumbling with the latch under the steering wheel. He walked to the front of the truck, and I watched him in the side mirror. He propped the hood open and disappeared behind it. I could hear the occasional metallic clink, the soft curse under his breath. I stayed in the cab, feeling useless, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I was intensely aware of him, of the way the cruiser's headlights caught the silver in his dark hair at the temples, the powerful line of his back as he leaned over the engine bay, the quiet competence in his every movement. This was closer than I had ever been to him. It felt illicit, like I was seeing something not meant for me. After a few minutes, he slammed the hood shut. The sound made me jump. He walked back to my window, wiping his hands on a rag he'd pulled from his back pocket. His hands were large, calloused, capable. "Your alternator's shot," he said simply. "She's not going anywhere tonight." Oh, the brilliant response of a man whose brain had ceased to function. Right. Well, thanks for checking. I prepared myself for the offer of a call to a tow truck, a brisk and professional departure. He just stood there, looking at me. That steady, unreadable gaze again. It felt like he was searching for something. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the wind in the pines. "Come on," he said finally, his voice softer now. "I'll give you a ride home." He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked back to his cruiser, assuming I would follow. And I did. Like a stray dog, offered a warm place to sleep. I locked my dead truck, grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, and walked toward the blinding headlights, toward him, feeling like I was stepping out of one life and into another. The passenger door of the cruiser opened with a heavy click. He'd unlocked it for me. It was a small thing, a simple courtesy, but it felt like a monumental act of grace. Getting into that car felt like a surrender. The days that followed were different. The quiet rhythm of my life had been disturbed, a stone dropped into a still pond. The memory of that night, the cold air, his low voice, the smell of his leather belt, was a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I hadn't just been rescued, I had been seen. And now, I saw him everywhere. Or maybe I was just finally allowing myself to look. Before, my observations of Sheriff Holt had been furtive, stolen glances from behind the front window of my shop. Now, it felt like a magnetic pull. I'd be shelving a new collection of poetry, and I'd see his cruiser glide past, his head turning just slightly in my direction. Was he looking for me? Or was I just projecting my own desperate hope onto his routine patrol? My internal monologue became a relentless cycle of analysis and self-doubt. He slowed down. He definitely slowed down. No, he didn't. You're imagining it. Stop being a creep, Leo. He started coming to the diner for lunch instead of just coffee in the mornings. The diner was directly across the street from my bookstore. I'd sit at my front counter, pretending to read, but my eyes would be fixed on the man in the corner booth. I learned the way he held his coffee mug, wrapped in both hands as if to warm them. I learned that he always ordered the daily special, no substitutions. I learned the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when Jan, the waitress, told him a piece of town gossip, a brief flash of amusement on his otherwise stoic face. He was watching me, too. I was sure of it. Sometimes, I'd feel the weight of his gaze from across the street. I'd look up, and our eyes would meet for a split second through the plate glass of two separate buildings. He wouldn't smile or nod. He would just hold my gaze for a heartbeat, that same steady, unreadable look from the night he'd found me. Then he'd look back down at his plate. It was nothing. It was everything. Each time it happened, my heart would perform a frantic, painful little tap dance against my ribs. It felt like a secret, a silent conversation only we were having. About a week after the truck incident, he came into the store. It was a drizzly afternoon, the bell above the door chiming softly. I was up on a ladder, trying to fix a buzzing fluorescent light, and I nearly fell off when I saw him standing there. He was out of uniform, wearing a simple gray Henley that stretched across his broad chest, and a pair of worn jeans. He looked bigger, more real, without the formal structure of his uniform. More approachable, and somehow, more intimidating. "Need a hand with that?" he asked, his voice filling the quiet space. "No. I mean, yes. I don't know," I stammered, clinging to the ladder like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of driftwood. "It just keeps buzzing." He gave a small, almost smile. "Here, let me." He didn't wait for permission. He just walked over, his presence seeming to take up all the air in the narrow aisle. I scrambled down the ladder, my face burning. He ascended it with an easy grace, his hands moving with that same quiet competence I'd seen under the hood of my truck. I stood below, trying my best not to stare at the way his jeans fit, the strong column of his neck, the way his hair curled just slightly over the collar of his shirt. The scent of him was different today. Not soap and leather, but damp earth from the rain and a faint, clean scent of laundry detergent. It was domestic. It was distracting. He fiddled with the fixture for a moment. A wire was jiggled, a bulb was twisted, and the buzzing stopped. Silence descended. "There," he said, looking down at me from the ladder. From this angle, I had to crane my neck to look at him. It made me feel small, exposed. "Should hold for a while." "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. You didn't have to do that. "I was passing by," he said, descending the ladder. He stepped onto the floor, and we were suddenly standing very close in the narrow space between bookshelves. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I got my truck back, by the way," I said, needing to fill the silence. "The alternator was, in fact, shot." "You were right. I usually am," he said. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was the closest I'd seen to a real smile, and it did strange things to my insides. He looked at a display of new arrivals on a nearby table. He picked up a thick biography of a Civil War general. His fingers, I noticed, were long and clean, the nails neatly trimmed. He thumbed through the pages, his expression thoughtful. "You read a lot?" he asked, not looking at me. "It's kind of the job," I said, attempting a joke. It fell completely flat. He looked up from the book, his gray eyes pinning me. "No, I mean you. Do you read them? Or just sell them?" The question was surprisingly direct. It felt personal. "I read them," I admitted. "Mostly history. And poetry." He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he'd already suspected. He placed the book back on the table, his movements precise. He let his fingers trail over the spines of a few other books before turning his attention back to me. "Well," he said, his voice dropping a little lower. "Thanks for the browsing." He turned to leave. As he passed me, his arm brushed against mine. It was nothing, a simple, accidental contact in a tight space. But it felt like a brand. A spark of heat shot up my arm, and I had to physically stop myself from flinching. I watched him walk to the door, my entire body buzzing, far worse than the faulty light had been. Just before he stepped out, he paused and looked back at me over his shoulder. "Leo," he said. It was the first time he'd said my name. It sounded different in his voice. Solid. Real. "Drive safe," he added, and then he was gone, the bell chiming his exit. I stood there for a full minute, my hand pressed to my arm where he had touched me, the single word of my name echoing in the quiet, empty bookstore. The stone in the pond had sent out another ripple, and it was getting closer to the shore. The touches, after that, became a kind of unspoken language. They were always small, always deniable. At the town's annual Founders' Day picnic, a crowded, noisy affair I usually avoided, I found myself cornered by the mayor, who was deep into a monologue about municipal bonds. I felt a sudden warmth on the small of my back, a large, firm hand pressing gently. "Excuse us, Mayor." Holt's low voice rumbled beside my ear. He guided me through the throng of people, his hand never leaving my back until we were clear of the main crowd, standing near the edge of the park by the creek. The warmth of his hand lingered long after he'd dropped it. He didn't say anything about it. He just started talking about the unseasonably warm weather, as if he hadn't just rescued me again, as if his touch hadn't just set my entire nervous system on fire. Another time, I was at the hardware store, trying to decipher the difference between a lag bolt and a carriage bolt. I felt a presence behind me and turned to find him there, reaching for a box on the shelf just above my head. His chest brushed against my shoulder blades. He was so close I could hear the soft sound of his breathing. He retrieved what he needed and stepped back, murmuring a quiet, "Pardon me," but the ghost of his body against mine remained. I stood there staring at the bolts, my mission completely forgotten, my mind replaying the fleeting moment of contact over and over again. Each touch was a question mark, a breadcrumb on a trail I was terrified to follow but couldn't bear to abandon. The storm came on a Thursday. It had been threatening all day, the sky a bruised purple-gray. The wind picked up in the late afternoon, rattling the windows of the shop and sending stray leaves skittering down the empty street. I love storms. I loved the drama of them. the way they made the world feel small and cozy. I'd lit the old Franklin stove in the back room of the shop, the one the previous owner had used, and was settling in with a book and a mug of tea when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of my laptop, the streetlights outside, all extinguished. The world was plunged into a sudden, profound darkness and silence, broken only by the howl of the wind and the crackle of the fire. I was surprisingly calm. I had candles. I had a fire. I had a book. It was almost romantic, in a solitary sort of way. I was lighting a few candles around the main room when a pair of headlights cut through the torrential rain, stopping directly in front of the store. It was the cruiser. My heart did its familiar, stupid flip. A moment later, a heavy, rhythmic banging sounded on the front door. It wasn't the knock of a customer. It was official, urgent. I unbolted the door, and the wind tore it from my hand, slamming it back against the inside wall. Sheriff Holt stood on the threshold, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead, his jacket soaked through. He looked immense, a force of nature unto himself, standing against the storm. "Leo," he shouted over the wind. "You okay in here?" "I'm fine," I yelled back, grabbing the door and fighting to pull it closed against the gale. "The power's just out." He stepped inside, helping me force the door shut and slide the bolt home. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled, leaving us in the flickering, intimate candlelight. Water dripped from his hair and his jacket, pooling on the old wooden floor. "Whole town's dark," he said, his voice now a low rumble in the quiet. He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back from his face. "Transformer on the edge of town got hit by lightning, they think. Could be out all night." "Oh," I said. "Well, I've got fire. And candles." He looked around the shop, his gaze landing on the warm glow coming from the back room. "You're the only place on Main Street with a fireplace, you know that." "It's a Franklin stove, actually," I corrected, and then immediately wanted to die. Of all the pedantic, nerdy things to say. He didn't seem to notice my mortification. He just nodded. "Right. A stove." He looked back at me, his gray eyes seeming darker, deeper in the candlelight. The professional mask was gone. He just looked like a man who was cold and wet and maybe a little tired. "I'm making rounds. Checking on the older folks. Just wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am. Thank you." The silence that fell between us was different from the others. It wasn't tense with unspoken questions. It was comfortable. The storm raging outside made the small, candlelit bookstore feel like a sanctuary, a world unto itself. You should warm up for a minute," I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "By the fire. Before you go back out there." He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought he was going to refuse. But then he gave a slow nod. "Yeah, okay. For a minute." He shrugged out of his heavy, wet jacket and hung it on the coat rack by the door. In his dark blue uniform shirt, the fabric damp and clinging slightly to his shoulders and chest, he seemed less like an official and more like a man. He followed me to the back room, a cozy, cluttered space filled with overstocked books and my personal reading chair. We stood before the Franklin stove, the orange flames dancing behind the glass door, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I busied myself making him a cup of tea, my hands shaking slightly. It felt so domestic, so surreal. Here was Sheriff Holt, the object of my silent, 2-year obsession, dripping rainwater onto my floor and warming his hands by my fire. "Here," I said, handing him the mug. Our fingers brushed as he took it. This time, the touch wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. His fingers closed over mine for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement, before he took the mug. My breath hitched. He took a sip, his eyes closed for a moment as he savored the warmth. "Thanks," he murmured. He didn't sit in the armchair. He just leaned against a tall stack of books, his long legs crossed at the ankles, and looked at the fire. The shared silence returned, but now it was filled with the soft sounds of the fire, the storm outside, and our breathing. "You ever miss it?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet. "Miss what?" "The city," he said, looking at me now. "The noise. The lights." I thought about it. I thought about the crushing anonymity, the frantic pace, the feeling of being a ghost in a crowd of millions. "No," I said honestly. "I don't." He nodded, taking another sip of tea. "I get that. What about you?" I asked, emboldened by the strange intimacy of the moment. "You're not from here, are you?" I can't detect the local accent. A faint smile touched his lips. "Is there a local accent?" "It's subtle," I said. "A certain flatness to the vowels." "I'll have to listen for it," he said. He stared into the fire again, his expression turning thoughtful, a little distant. "No, I'm not from here. I grew up in Philadelphia. Was a cop there for 10 years. I was stunned. I couldn't imagine him in a bustling, chaotic city. He seemed so perfectly suited to the quiet mountains and sprawling forests of Cascade Creek. "What made you leave?" He was quiet for a long time, and I was sure I had overstepped. I was about to apologize when he spoke, his voice low and heavy. "My partner was killed. On a call that went bad. After that, the noise was too much. The lights were too bright. I needed quiet." He looked up from the fire, and his eyes found mine in the flickering light. For the first time, I saw something in them other than unreadable steadiness. I saw a deep, settled sadness. A vulnerability he kept carefully hidden. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He just gave a slight, dismissive shake of his head, as if to brush off the sympathy. But the confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, precious thing. He had shared a piece of his pain with me. He had trusted me with it. "And you?" he asked, shifting the focus back to me. "What are you hiding from out here, Leo?" The question was gentle, but it pierced right through me. Hiding. That's what I was doing. Hiding from the failure of my career in the city, hiding from a string of disastrous relationships, hiding from the gnawing fear that I was fundamentally unlovable, hiding from myself. I couldn't say all that, so I just said the simplest truth. Loneliness, I guess. The admission felt huge, a crack in the careful facade I presented to the world. I expected him to offer a platitude, to look away, to change the subject. But he didn't. He just held my gaze, his own eyes full of a sudden, startling understanding. It was as if he could see all the way down to the lonely skeleton I'd been living with for so long. "Yeah," he said, his voice a soft rasp. "I get that too." And in that moment, in the warm, candlelit bookstore, with the storm raging outside, I didn't feel lonely at all. We stood there in the comfortable silence, two solitary men who had sought quiet and found each other in it. The barrier between us, the one made of uniforms and professional distance and my own fear, had dissolved into nothing. The tipping point came a few weeks later. The fragile peace we'd found in the storm had settled into a new kind of normal. Holt came by the shop more often, always with a plausible excuse, to ask about a certain book, to drop off a flyer for a town event, or just to check the locks. The touches became more frequent, less accidental. A hand on my shoulder as he looked at a book over my head. His fingers lingering on mine as I handed him his change for a paperback he didn't seem interested in reading. The tension between us was a living thing now, a constant, low-grade hum that vibrated in the air whenever we were near each other. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. One Friday evening, I was closing up. It was late, well past 9, and the street outside was deserted. I was just turning the sign to closed when a group of 3 young men, guys from the logging camp up the mountain, stumbled past. They were drunk, loud, and looking for trouble. I recognized one of them, a guy named Riggs with a mean streak and a sneer permanently etched on his face. They saw the light on in my shop and stopped, peering in. "Hey, look, it's the book fairy," Riggs slurred, his friends snickering behind him. My stomach clenched. I'd heard the whispers before, the occasional snide comment at the general store. In a town this small, a single man who keeps to himself and sells poetry is an easy target for a certain kind of masculine insecurity. I ignored them, turning away from the door to start shutting down my computer. That was a mistake. One of them rattled the door handle. "Hey, we're talking to you." I froze. My heart started to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I didn't turn around. I just stood there, hoping they would get bored and leave. Then, one of them banged a fist against the glass. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent shop. "What's the matter? Too good to talk to us?" Riggs's voice was laced with a genuine, ugly malice now. "Come on out here, pretty boy." The slur he used next was quiet, but it hit me like a physical blow. Before I could even process what to do, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness across the street. It moved with a speed and purpose that was breathtaking. I saw the familiar shape of Holt's cruiser, parked silently in the shadows of the diner, its lights off. He must have been sitting there, watching. He crossed the street in a dozen long, silent strides. The three men didn't even see him coming until he was right there, a towering, furious presence in the dim streetlight. "That's enough," Holt said. His voice was dangerously quiet. It was a voice I had never heard before. It was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of the calm patience he usually projected. It was the voice of a man who was seconds away from violence. Riggs and his friends turned, their drunken bravado instantly evaporating when they saw who it was. They looked like startled sheep. "Sheriff," Riggs stammered. "We were just fooling around," I said. Holt repeated, taking a slow step forward, forcing them to take a step back. "That's enough. Get out of here. Go home. And if I ever see you on this side of the street again, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Do you understand me?" His gaze was so intense, so full of cold fire, that I could feel the heat of it from inside the shop. This wasn't just a sheriff doing his job. This was personal. The anger radiating from him was a protective shield, and it was aimed squarely at the threat to me. "Yes, sir," Riggs mumbled, his eyes on the ground. He and his friends practically tripped over each other in their haste to get away, their drunken swagger replaced by a hurried, pathetic shuffle. Holt stood there for a long moment, watching them disappear down the street. He didn't relax. His shoulders were still squared, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He looked like a wolf guarding his territory. Then, slowly, he turned and looked at my shop. He looked right at me, standing frozen in the middle of the room. His face was unreadable in the shadows, but I could feel the intensity of his stare, a physical pressure against my skin. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me, ensuring I was safe. After what felt like an eternity, he gave a single, sharp nod, turned, and walked back to his cruiser, melting back into the darkness. I locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. My legs felt weak. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the door, my breath fogging it up. It wasn't just fear I was feeling. It was something else. A profound, overwhelming sense of being protected, of being cared for. The raw, undisguised fury in Holt's voice had been for me. He hadn't just been keeping the peace. He had been defending me. The realization settled deep in my bones, a terrifying, exhilarating truth. The hum of tension between us had just exploded into a deafening roar. The next day, the air in the shop felt heavy, charged with the memory of the night before. Every time the bell on the door chimed, my head would snap up, my heart lurching in anticipation. I was a wreck, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. The ugly words, the fear, and then Holt's sudden, furious appearance. It was almost noon when he finally came in. He was in uniform again, the familiar barrier of his profession back in place. He closed the door quietly behind him and stood there for a moment, his gray eyes scanning the shop before they settled on me. I was pretending to organize a shelf, but my hands were trembling. "Leo," he said. His voice was back to its usual low, calm frequency, but there was an undercurrent of something else there. A tightness. "Sheriff," I replied, my voice coming out as a squeak. I cleared my throat. "Thank you. For last night." He walked slowly toward the counter, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor. He stopped on the other side of it, creating a physical barrier between us, but it did nothing to lessen the intensity in the room. "It's my job to deal with people like that," he said, but his eyes told a different story. They were fixed on my face, searching. "It felt like more than that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The words were out before I could stop them. It was too late to take them back. The air crackled. He didn't deny it. He just held my gaze, and the silence stretched on, thick and loaded with everything we hadn't said for months. The subtext was a tidal wave threatening to drown us both. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching near his temple. "You need to be more careful," he said, his voice rough. It was a simple statement, but the meaning behind it was vast and deep. It wasn't an order from a lawman. It was a plea from a man who had been terrified. "I was scared for you. I can't stand the thought of you getting hurt." That was what he was really saying. I could hear it in the strained timbre of his voice, see it in the fierce, protective light in his eyes. "I know," I managed to say. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the counter. His knuckles were white. He looked like he wanted to say more, like he was fighting a war with himself. The professional Sheriff Holt versus the man who had admitted he, too, was lonely. The man who had stood guard in the dark. He started, then stopped. He shook his head slightly, as if to clear it. Just lock up earlier from now on. All right, I agreed, though we both knew that wasn't the point. He nodded, seeming to accept this as the end of the conversation. He pushed himself back from the counter, his posture becoming more rigid, more official. But as he turned to leave, his eyes met mine one last time. And in that fleeting look, I saw it all. The worry, the anger, the frustration, and something else, something so vulnerable and raw it stole the breath from my lungs. Longing. It was the same desperate, aching longing I saw in my own reflection every morning. He left without another word. I stood behind the counter, my hands flat on the wood where his had been, feeling the phantom heat of his touch. It was no longer a question of if something was going to happen between us. It was a question of when. The confrontation had happened, not with fists or shouts, but in the charged space of unspoken truths. The fuse had been lit. That night, I couldn't settle. I stayed late at the shop again, not out of necessity, but because the thought of being in my quiet apartment felt unbearable. The silence there would be too loud. I tidied shelves that were already tidy, alphabetized authors who were already in order. I was just running from my own thoughts, from the memory of that look in Holt's eyes. It was close to midnight when I finally gave up, locked the front door of the shop, and walked around to the back alley where my truck was parked. The alley was dark, lit only by a single, flickering bulb above a neighboring building's service door. I unlocked my truck and slid inside. The familiar scent of old upholstery and faint oil a small comfort. I put the key in the ignition, but I didn't turn it. I just sat there, my head resting against the cool glass of the driver's side window, and stared at the brick wall across from me. What was I doing? What was this dance I was in with the town sheriff? A man who was all quiet intensity and coiled strength. A man who looked at me like I was a puzzle he was desperate to solve. A sudden wash of headlights filled my rearview mirror, so bright and unexpected that I flinched, shielding my eyes. A vehicle had pulled into the alley behind me, blocking me in. My heart leaped into my throat, the memory of Riggs and his friends still fresh and raw. But this wasn't a rusty pickup. The clean, sharp lines of the vehicle, the familiar silhouette, it was the cruiser. The headlights cut off, plunging the alley back into near darkness, lit only by the weak security light and the cruiser's parking lights. The engine died. My own engine was off. The silence was absolute. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What is he doing? The driver's door of the cruiser opened and closed with that solid, definitive sound I knew so well. Footsteps on the pavement. Slow, deliberate, coming toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched in my side mirror as his tall frame grew larger, resolving out of the darkness until he was standing right beside my door. I didn't roll down the window. I just sat there, looking at him through the glass. His face was half in shadow, his expression unreadable, but the tension coming off him was a palpable force. He didn't knock. He just waited. My hand is shaking as I reach for the handle. My body moves of its own accord, a puppet pulled by strings of inevitability. I push the door open, forcing him to take a step back. I swing my legs out and stand, using the edge of the door for support. We are standing face to face in the narrow space between my truck and the brick wall. He is so close. I can smell the night air on his clothes, the faint scent of coffee on his breath. "You're working late again," he says. It is not a question. His voice is a low, gravelly thing that vibrates in my chest. I couldn't settle. I admit, my voice thin. "Me neither," he says. His gray eyes are locked on mine. They are not unreadable now. They are dark, intense, stripped of all pretense. I see the frustration, the exhaustion, the want. It mirrors my own. This thing between us, Leo. This watching, waiting. I can't do it anymore. My breath catches in my throat. This is it. The breaking point. The moment where everything either shatters or solidifies. "I don't know what you're talking about." I lie, a last, desperate act of self-preservation. A muscle in his jaw clenches. "Don't," he says, his voice dropping even lower, laced with a raw, pleading edge. "Don't do that. Not tonight." He takes a small step forward, closing the remaining distance between us. My back is now flush against the cold metal of my truck. He is caging me in, his body a warm, solid wall in front of me. He raises a hand, not to touch me, but to brace himself against the truck, his arm next to my head. I am completely surrounded by him. I sat in my car for an hour tonight, he confesses, his voice a rough whisper. Across the street, just watching the light in your window. Like I do most nights, he lets out a shaky breath. This is insane. I can only stare at him, my mind reeling. Most nights. He'd been watching me most nights. The hope that I'd been so carefully suppressing blooms in my chest, fierce and painful. Why? I managed to ask. You know why? He says, his gaze dropping to my mouth. The air electrifies. My lips part on a breath I can't seem to take. He looks back up, his eyes burning into mine. I'm done pretending this is just me doing my job, Leo. I'm done pretending I'm not thinking about you every damn minute of the day. The confession hangs in the cold night air, beautiful and terrifying. My carefully constructed world tilts on its axis. He leans in closer, his forehead almost touching mine. I can feel the heat of his skin, the soft puff of his breath. He smells of clean soap and utter resolve. I shouldn't do this, he murmurs, more to himself than to me. This is not professional. He lets out a short, humorless laugh. But I'm going to. Then he looks me straight in the eye, a flicker of that old, almost smile on his lips, but this time it's charged with something new, something possessive. For tonight, he says, his voice a husky promise. You're in my custody. And then he closes the final inch between us. His mouth covers mine. It is not a gentle kiss. It is not tentative or questioning. It is a kiss of pure, unadulterated certainty. It is months of stolen glances, of unspoken thoughts, of simmering tension finally breaking the surface. His lips are firm, demanding, the stubble on his jaw are rough, exquisite friction against my skin. One of his hands comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me in place as if he fears I might bolt. His other hand is still braced against the truck, his arm a steel bar beside my head. I make a small sound in the back of my throat, a mix of surprise and surrender, and my hands, which had been hanging uselessly at my sides, come up to grip the front of his uniform shirt, balling the thick fabric in my fists. I am not pushing him away. I am holding on for dear life. He deepens the kiss, his tongue tracing the seam of my lips, a silent, urgent question. I answer without hesitation, opening for him, and the kiss transforms. It becomes a conversation, a desperate exchange of all the things we couldn't say. His taste is coffee and mint, and something that is purely, intoxicatingly Holt. He tastes of safety and danger all at once. This is not for show. This is not for cover. This is not a mistake. This is honest. This is real. The feel of his body pressed against mine is grounding. The solidity of him a stark contrast to the way my knees are threatening to buckle. He pulls back just enough for us to breathe, our foreheads resting against each other. His eyes are closed. His breathing is as ragged as mine. Leo, he breathes, my name a prayer on his lips. He kisses me again, slower this time, more searching. It's a kiss of discovery, of mapping new territory. It's a kiss that says, it's you. It's been you all along. And I kiss him back with all the pent-up loneliness and silent yearning of the last 2 years. I am no longer an observer. I am here, in the dark alley, pinned against my truck by the town sheriff, being kissed with a ferocity and a tenderness that is undoing me. In that moment, I realize I haven't just come home to Cascade Creek. I have come home to him. I woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the unfamiliar blinds of Holt's bedroom. For a moment, I was disoriented. The sheets smelled of him, that clean, soap and laundry detergent scent, and the memories of the night before came rushing back in a dizzying, heart-stopping flood. The kiss in the alley. The silent, charged drive to his house. A small, secluded cabin at the edge of the woods. The way he'd undressed me with a reverence that made my skin burn. The feel of his hands, his mouth, his body. It had been overwhelming, a release of pressure so intense it had left me feeling boneless and raw. I turned my head. The other side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cool. A familiar, cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling the lingering warmth of the night. He was gone. Of course, he was gone. Panic, sharp and acidic, clawed at my throat. What had I done? It was a mistake. A moment of insanity fueled by months of tension. He was the sheriff. He had a position to maintain, a reputation, and I was me, the quiet, awkward bookseller. He regretted it. He must have woken up, seen me lying in his bed, and been hit with a tidal wave of regret. He'd probably snuck out, unable to face the morning after awkwardness. My internal monologue went into overdrive, a spiral of self-recrimination and anxiety. You idiot. You absolute fool. You read too much into everything. He was just letting off steam. Now you've made it weird. You've ruined the one good, mysterious thing in your pathetic, lonely life. I sat up, my body aching in a way that was both pleasant and a stark reminder of our intimacy. The room was Spartan, masculine. A simple wooden dresser, a bookshelf filled with what looked like historical nonfiction and crime novels, a framed map of the county on the wall. It was a room that belonged to a man who didn't bother with adornment. It was Holt's room, and I felt like an intruder. I had to get out of there. I couldn't bear the thought of him coming back and finding me, of having to endure the polite, regretful conversation. This was a mistake speech. I swung my legs out of bed and began to search for my clothes, which were scattered in a messy trail from the door. My movements were clumsy, hurried. I felt a desperate urge to flee, to rewind time to before that kiss, to go back to my safe, lonely existence of watching him from afar. At least then, the hope was still intact, a perfect, unblemished fantasy. Now it was in danger of being shattered by reality. I was pulling on my jeans, my shirt still in my hand, when I heard a sound from the main room. A soft clink of ceramic. The quiet opening of a cabinet. He was still here. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was in the kitchen, not gone, just in the other room. The relief was so sharp it almost buckled my knees, but it was immediately followed by a fresh wave of anxiety. What did I do? Do I get dressed and walk out there? Do I pretend to be asleep? The silence from the other room was deafening. Was he waiting for me? Was he hoping I'd just disappear? I chose the coward's route. I finished dressing as quietly as I could, my shoes in my hand, and crept to the bedroom door. I peeked through the crack. He was standing at the kitchen counter, his back to me. He was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, his hair damp, presumably from a shower. He was pouring coffee into 2 mugs. 2 mugs. The sight of that second mug did something to me. It was a simple, domestic act, but it was so full of intention. You don't pour coffee for someone you regret sleeping with. You don't pour coffee for someone you want to disappear. He must have sensed me, or heard the floorboard creak, because he turned his head. Our eyes met across the length of the cabin's main room. He didn't look regretful. He didn't look awkward. He looked calm. That steady, solid presence was back, but it was different now. Softer. His gaze held mine for a long moment, and a slow, small smile touched his lips. It was a real smile this time, gentle and private. "Morning," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble that settled the frantic fluttering in my chest. All my fears, all my panicked internal monologues, evaporated in the warmth of that single word, that simple smile. The cold dread was replaced by a tentative, fragile hope. I walked out of the bedroom, my shoes still in my hand, feeling shy and exposed. "Morning," I replied, my voice a little hoarse. He held out one of the mugs to me. "Coffee." I walked over and took it from him. Our fingers brushed, and the familiar spark was there, but it wasn't laced with tension anymore. It was just warmth. Connection. I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and black, just how I liked it. How did he know that? Had he noticed at the diner? The thought that he had been paying that much attention to me was both thrilling and humbling. I thought you'd left," I admitted, staring down into my mug. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. The movement made the fabric of his t-shirt pull taut, outlining the solid muscles beneath. "Where would I go?" he asked simply. "I don't know. Work." Fleeing in terror, the self-deprecating joke slipped out before I could stop it. He didn't laugh. He just watched me, his expression serious. He pushed himself off the counter and took a step toward me. He reached out and gently took the mug from my hand, placing both of our cups on the counter behind him. Then he took my hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his fingers lacing through mine with a comfortable, possessive ease. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Look at me." I lifted my gaze from the floor to meet his. His gray eyes were clear, steady, and full of a sincerity that left no room for doubt. I woke up this morning, he said slowly, deliberately, and the first thing I thought was, I wasn't alone. And it felt, he paused, searching for the word. It felt right. Safer than I've felt in a long time. He squeezed my hand. There is no regret. Not for a second. Is that clear? I could only nod, my throat suddenly thick with emotion. The quiet, direct reassurance was more powerful than any grand, romantic declaration. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't hedging his bets. He was just stating a fact. This was real. Okay, I whispered. Okay, he echoed, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. The quiet comfort of the moment was, of course, too good to last. This was Cascade Creek, after all. Our newfound, fragile intimacy was about to be put to the test. It started at the diner. A few days later, we walked in together for lunch. It wasn't planned as a statement, but it was one nonetheless. The moment we stepped through the door, the usual chatter and clatter of the lunch rush seemed to dip in volume for a split second. Every head turned. I felt a blush creep up my neck, a sudden, intense self-consciousness. But Holt's hand was on the small of my back, a firm, steadying pressure, and he guided us to his usual corner booth as if he didn't notice a thing. Jan, the waitress, came over, her expression a mixture of surprise and poorly concealed curiosity. Well, look at you two, she said, her tone a little too bright. Sheriff, Leo, what can I get for you? The usual for me, Jan, Holt said, not missing a beat. He looked at me, his eyes softening. Leo, just a coffee, thanks. I mumbled, feeling like every eye in the room was dissecting me. The whispers started as soon as Jan walked away. I could feel the stares. I could see the heads leaning together at other tables. Mrs. Gable was in a booth with two other women from her gardening club, and they were all looking at us over their menus, their faces a mask of speculative gossip. It was exactly what I had always feared about small-town life. There were no secrets. Everyone's business was everyone's business. I wanted to shrink, to disappear under the table. But Holt just sat there, calm as ever, sipping his water. He reached across the table and nudged my hand with his fingers. Ignore them, he said quietly, his voice for my ears only. They're staring, I whispered back, mortified. Let them, he said, his fingers wrapping around mine on the tabletop, a bold, public declaration. They'll get used to it. His confidence was a shield. Holding his hand, feeling the solid, unapologetic weight of it, I felt a little of my own fear begin to subside. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't hiding. Why should I? The bigger test came at the station. A few days after that, I stopped by with a book I'd ordered for him. One of his deputies, a young, cocky guy named Miller, was at the front desk. He looked me up and down with a smirk that made my skin crawl. Well, Miller said, leaning back in his chair. If it isn't the sheriff's new friend. He in the back. I'm sure he'll be real happy to see you. The insinuation was thick and ugly. Before I could even formulate a response, Holt's voice cut through the air from his office down the hall. Miller, it was that same cold, flat tone he'd used on Riggs. My office. Now, Miller's smirk vanished. He paled and scrambled to his feet, hurrying down the hall. The office door closed, but I could hear the low, angry murmur of Holt's voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. After a minute, Miller came scurrying back out, his face flushed with humiliation. He wouldn't even look at me as he scurried past the front desk and out the main door. Holt appeared in his office doorway, leaning against the frame. He looked at me, his expression softening instantly. Sorry about that, he said. It's okay, I said, though it wasn't. The deputy's sneer had felt like a slap. No, it's not, Holt said, his jaw tight. But it won't happen again. He looked at the book in my hand. Is that for me? I nodded, holding it out. He walked over and took it, his fingers brushing mine. He looked at the cover and then back at me, a genuine, warm smile spreading across his face. Thank you. Standing there in the quiet station, with the lingering ghost of Miller's bigotry and the solid, protective presence of Holt, I understood. This was the reality of it. There would be whispers, stares, and ugly comments. But there would also be this man who faced it head-on, who defended me without hesitation, who made it clear to the entire world that I was with him. The test wasn't just for me, to see if I could handle the scrutiny. It was for him, to prove that he was willing to stand by my side, no matter what. And he hadn't flinched. A week later, on a cool, clear Saturday, Holt drove me out to his cabin. This time, there was no urgency, no storm, no pretense. We'd spent most of the past week together, falling into a comfortable rhythm of quiet evenings at my apartment or his place, learning the landscape of each other's lives. But this felt different. He parked the truck but didn't turn off the engine right away. He just sat there, looking at the small, sturdy cabin nestled amongst the tall pines. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, painting everything in a warm, golden light. "I bought this place when I first moved here," he said quietly, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "It was a wreck. Took me a year to fix it up." He looked over at me. "It's the first place that ever really felt like mine, like a real home." I knew what he was doing. He was sharing another piece of himself with me, just like he had during the storm. He was showing me the place where he had built his quiet, solitary peace. He turned off the engine, and the silence of the woods settled around us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, simple brass key. It was worn, the edges smooth from use. He held it out to me on the palm of his large hand. "What's this?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "It's a key," he said, a small, wry smile on his lips. He looked me in the eye, his expression earnest, vulnerable. "I want you to have it, Leo. You don't ever have to use it. There's no pressure. But I want you to know that you have a place. That my home it's your home, too. If you want it to be." I stared at the key lying in his palm. It was so much more than a piece of metal. It was a promise, an invitation. It was the conscious, deliberate choice to build a future. It was everything I had ever secretly wanted but never believed I could have. My vision blurred for a second. Slowly, I reached out and took the key from his hand. It was warm from his skin. I closed my fingers around it, the metal pressing into my palm. "I want it to be," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It felt like relief. It felt like joy. It felt like coming home. His shoulders seemed to relax, a tension I hadn't even noticed he was holding draining away. He brought his hand up and cupped my cheek, his thumb gently stroking my skin. "Good," he whispered. We didn't go inside right away. We just sat there in the truck for a long time as the sun dipped below the mountains, holding hands, the key a solid, comforting weight in my pocket. We had made our choice. We were going to figure this out, together. The next morning, I woke up in Holt's bed, but this time there was no panic. There was only the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing next to me and the solid weight of his arm draped possessively over my waist. I lay there for a long time, just listening, just feeling. The pale morning light was just beginning to filter into the room, and the world outside was quiet except for the distant chatter of a bird. I turned carefully in his arms to face him. He was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful in a way I rarely saw when he was awake. The usual stoic mask was gone, revealing the man beneath. A faint scar cut through one of his dark eyebrows, a detail I'd never noticed before. His stubble was rough against the pillowcase. I had an overwhelming urge to reach out and trace the line of his jaw, but I didn't want to wake him. This moment felt too precious, too private. Eventually, the smell of pine and the need for coffee lured me from the bed. I slipped out from under his arm as gently as I could and padded into the main room. The cabin was cool and quiet. I found the coffee maker and started a pot, the familiar ritual a comforting anchor in this new, wonderful reality. As the coffee brewed, I walked over to the large window that looked out over the woods. The sun was just beginning to crest the ridge, sending spears of pale gold light through the trees. A thin layer of mist clung to the forest floor, making it look magical, otherworldly. I stood there, mug in hand, just watching the world wake up. "It's a good view." His voice, low and raspy with sleep, made me turn. He was leaning against the bedroom doorframe, wearing just his sweatpants, his arms crossed over his bare chest. His hair was a mess, and his eyes were still soft with sleep. He looked so beautifully unguarded, so completely at ease. My heart did a slow, happy roll in my chest. "It is," I agreed, taking a sip of coffee. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," he said, walking toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing behind me, his chest pressing against my back. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me flush against him, and rested his chin on my shoulder. We stood there together, looking out the window at the sunrise. His warmth enveloped me, a solid, living blanket. I could get used to this, he murmured into my ear, his breath warm against my neck. Me too, I said, leaning my head back against his shoulder. We didn't talk much after that. We just stood there, sharing the quiet intimacy of a new morning, drinking our coffee as the sun climbed higher, burning the mist off the trees. He started making breakfast, moving around his kitchen with that familiar, easy competence. I sat at the small wooden table, just watching him, a stupid, happy smile on my face. The simple domesticity of it, the sizzle of bacon in a pan, the smell of coffee, the comfortable silence between us, was more intimate than anything that had happened in the dark. This was it. This was the peace I had been looking for when I moved to Cascade Creek. I had come here seeking solitude, a quiet place to hide from the world and from myself. I thought I wanted to be alone, but I was wrong. I just wanted to be alone with the right person. I looked at this strong, quiet man who had seen the loneliness in me because he recognized it in himself. The man who had guarded me, challenged me, and finally claimed me. He'd blocked me in an alley and told me I was in his custody, and in doing so, he had set me free. He turned from the stove, a plate of bacon in his hand, and caught me watching him. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. I just shook my head, my smile widening. He brought the plates to the table and sat down across from me. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and catching the silver at his temples. He looked at me, his gray eyes clear and full of a quiet, steady love that I now knew how to read perfectly. I was no longer an observer, watching life from behind a pane of glass. I was here, in the heart of it, sitting across from the man I loved, with a key to his home in my pocket and a future that felt as bright and boundless as the morning sky. I finally felt like I'd come home.